going to need some 3/8. Whoops. I've finished threading the whole hole. Or the entire hole. Learn how to talk. You know, stop talking too much. And hopefully I don't screw anything up. Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. So I'm sure that you guys have all heard of the Dyna death wobble, and you can actually purchase these kits that take care of the death wobble that you get on a Dyna, and they're pretty simple if you look at them. So my dad and I have decided that we're just going to make our own stabilizer kit for my Dyna, and I'm going to show you guys how we're doing that in this video. Okay, so to start with, to do this job, you are going to need some 3/4 inch steel, either plate or flat bar. We're using flat bar. You're also going to need a couple of these stabilizers. You can use regular heim joints if you want, but we're actually using the top motor mount stabilizer that Drake Specialties sells for the 1980 to 08 FXR and FLT. So that's the package part number there. So you can use regular heim joints if you need to, but we're just going with these ones, and these ones actually have less movement in the actual eye part of the heim joint than what a normal heim joint would. And we are replacing the bolts in my motor mounts with fine thread bolts. So these are 3/8 fine thread, and we're going to be replacing the coarse thread bolts in there with fine thread ones. Mostly because I own a fine thread tap. Fine thread is always a little safer in my opinion if you've got stuff that can shake apart. So I'll just show you guys how we did our measurements, and then I'm going to start cutting this thing apart. So this is the rear of the frame here. So that's 5 inches from the outside of the frame rail here to the other side here. And then the second measurement we took was our motor mount here. So that is 2 inches and a 64th. And that's close enough. We just kind of went with 2 inches because these measurements don't need to be exact. We just kind of want to make sure that we have enough clearance from the motor mount around the frame to the outside. So with 2 inches on the motor mount and 5 inches on the outside of the frame, we know we have 1.5 inches of offset on either side. So we just have to make sure that the block that we're cutting out is going to have at least 1.5 inches, or just a little more. We're giving it an extra 1/8 of an inch of clearance to make it around the frame. Okay, so just to give you guys a little bit of a better idea of what I'm trying to show you under the bike there, this is just a really crappily drawn diagram of the top view of the motor mount here. You've got your bolts coming through it, and then these are the 2 frame rails there, or the frame posts I should call them. So from the outside of the frame post here to the outside on the other side is 5 inches, and then we've got a 2-inch motor mount. So that gives us 1.5 inches of offset on either side. So our block is going to be cut out of our 3/4 inch plate. It's going to mount onto the side of our motor mount here, and then it has to come out around the frame, out back here somewhere, and that's where our heim joint is going to attach onto there. So using those measurements, this is the template that we've got, and that's kind of what our piece is going to look like, and that's how it's going to sit in the bike, just like that. So that's what I'm cutting out of my 3/4 inch steel right now, and I've got that set up in the drill press. So we're using a piece of 3/4 inch flat bar to cut out my rear stabilizer block, and we've already got everything marked out on the flat bar here. So these are the lines that we're going to be cutting along. And right now I'm actually just going to be drilling out the corner, and that's just so that we can cut into these corner with our bandsaw without any interference. So let's just get started on this. Alright, so here's my part here that I just cut out, and this is going to be for the rear stabilizer. I've just got a couple rough dots just Sharpied on there, but I'm gonna have to drill and tap a couple holes here so that this can bolt onto the side of the motor mount. So this will bolt onto the side of the motor mount here. This is to clear the frame. And then we will drill and tap another hole here just to put that stabilizer or heim joint or whatever you want to call it into the end there. And then the stabilizer will mount solid to the frame. It's got some cleaning up that it needs to have done to it, but that's kind of the rough cut piece. And then this piece here that I cut out of the corner of that will actually work for the front stabilizer block. So this will need to have a couple holes drilled and tapped into it so that that can mount onto the front motor mount. But we're not working on that piece yet. We're just going to be focusing on the rear one and getting that finished and then going on to the front. So the next step here, you're going to need to find your center to center on your motor mount holes there, where those bolts are coming through. I've already found mine, and what I actually did is I just put a jack under there with a small piece of wood on the jack, and I just jacked it up just enough to get the weight off of those bolts so that I could slide them out just far enough so that I could actually get like a measuring tool in there to actually measure that. And I'll show you guys an easy way to find center to center if you've got two holes side by side like that. So just using this piece of steel to demonstrate, I'm just going to show you guys an easy way to find center to center if you've got side by side holes like this. So if you measure from your outside edge on either hole, so you go to the right side of the hole to the outside right side of this hole, that measurement will be your center to center on your holes. So if I go like this, so that measurement here that I'm getting will be the same center to center. So if you go to your outside edge there, to your outside edge here, then that will be the same as your center to center. So if you have the same chassis as mine, your measurements are likely going to be the same. You can double check. It's always good to double check just to be safe, especially if you're going to be doing fabricating and using material and cutting stuff. But my measurements for the front center to center was 1 1/8 inches. And for the rear bolts on the rear motor mount was 1 1/4 inches center to center. So the next step is just to drill and tap our holes out for the rear mount, and then we'll be able to get on with the front mount once we got the rear done. And I'm just getting ready to tap these holes now. I have my tap set up in my drill press, and I've got my belt undone in the drill press, so it's not actually hooked up to the motor right now because I'm going to turn this in by hand. And I've shown this before in other videos, but new people on my channel might not know this yet. I like to start my taps on the drill press just because that helps them to go into the hole straight, so you don't end up with your thread going kind of crooked like that, or your tap starting crooked. So if I start my threads on the drill press, it makes it a whole lot easier. So I just turn this all by hand, and I just kind of put a slight pressure on my lever here, pushing down. Another thing too, if you're doing this, you want to make sure that your chuck is done up really tight, otherwise your tap will start to turn in the chuck. And when I start a hole, I'll start it on the drill press, and then I'll take it over to my bench, put it in a vise, and finish tapping this by hand. Okay, I've got all of my holes tapped for both my front and my rear mounts. I've got to do some cleaning up, a little bit of belt sanding and stuff, and just kind of make them look nice. And then we will be ready to start fitting them on the bike with the heim joints. And the fastener shop didn't actually have the bolts the length that I need, so I'm gonna have to cut a bunch of bolts. I've got like 6 bolts I've got to cut shorter, and I'm just gonna have to do that with a hacksaw. So good old hacksaws. Every time I'm cutting bolts too, I always clamp the section that I'm not going to be using. Most critical part of the cut, because you don't want saw blade jumping up into the part of the bolt you want to keep. Like that. One down. 100 to go. Alright, so we've got these mocked up on here, and we got to make a couple tabs to weld to the frame. So we're going to make a tab to weld on here, and that's where this one is going to end up bolting to. We're just going to make something out of 1/4 inch steel plate. It's going to weld there, and then that'll attach there. But that's pretty much how that one's going to end up fitting. So that's much more compact or cleaner looking than the Sputhe ones. The Sputhe ones actually kind of come way out here, and ours is just a little more tucked in. So it's looking pretty good so far. I'm going to clean up these corners and round them up a little bit and just give this a little bit of shape so it's not just a big ugly block on the front of the bike. And we needed to put just a little bit of a spacer here in the front one, just since this block is exactly level with the motor mount. We wanted to space that up a little bit, of course, so we conveniently had a proper size spacer for that. This is my rear mount here, and you can't see back there, but it's mounted to the motor mount. And then we've got this section coming around here. And if you come around to the back here, you can see that we've got a little bit of clearance here on the right side with the swing arm, which that's enough clearance because this end of the heim joint is actually going to move with the swing arm, so you don't need a whole lot of clearance there. This end of the heim joint, however, is not going to move with the swing arm. So this end is going to need a little bit more clearance, and you need this whole thing to be sitting parallel to. You can't have it sitting at an angle. So this is going to have to come down just a little bit about there to give us the amount of clearance that we're going to want on this end. So the mount is going to have to be bent here, somewhere around here, and we're just going to have to bend that down just far enough that we get the clearance that we're going to need on the other end of this heim joint here. And then the same idea is on the front. We're going to weld a tab that we're going to make out of 1/4 inch steel plate to this end of the frame, and then that's where that end of the heim joint is going to actually bolt in there. Alright, so I've got the holes tapped out on this piece here, and I've still got to cut this into a couple tabs basically, but I'm going to make templates out of cardboard just for fitting everything to the frame so that I'm not cutting my metal a million times. It's a lot easier if you get cardboard to fit exactly the way you need your metal to, and then you just cut your metal out to fit what you've figured out with your cardboard. Anyway, I'm not going to show you guys how to make templates, but I did want to show you guys just a quick little trick just for getting my holes kind of perfect in here, because I want the holes on my template to fit my bolts pretty exactly, and I just have a little trick for doing that my dad showed me, so I'm going to show you guys how to do this. Okay, so I'm using 3/8 bolts, so I want the holes in my template to be about 3/8. I want them to fit the bolts as nicely as they can. I'm going to start out just by punching a hole just with this generic hole punch. Obviously that's not 3/8, it's a lot smaller. So I'm going to get a 3/8 hole though just with this little trick. So I've got a little ball bearing that's just sitting in a piece of scrap that has a hole in it, and then I've got this spacer here that has a 3/8 hole in it, and I know it's a 3/8 hole because I drilled it out with a 3/8 drill. So I've just got my ball bearing just kind of being held in that piece of metal there with my hole in it, and then I'm going to center the hole that I just punched in the cardboard, just kind of help me center this, and now I'll just give it a smack with a hammer. And that just cut it out, kind of just like a little makeshift hole punch, and you'll be able to see that the bolt fits pretty exact. So that fits that 3/8 bolt pretty much exactly. Okay, so this is our cardboard template of what our piece is going to end up looking like once we're finished fabricating it. And so this is going to fit around the frame just kind of like this. We just kind of roughly measured the distance from the edge of the hole on the heim joint to the edge of the frame there so that we could get that a little close. It doesn't have to be exact, obviously, because this is adjustable, but you want this thing to not have to be shrunken out too much, and you obviously want to have enough space between your frame and your heim joint. And we also wanted to compensate for this angle that we have on the frame here. As you can see, it's at a bit of an angle here. So we're going to make sure that this piece, once it's on here, it's not going to be going with the angle of the frame. We want that to sit flat like that. So over here at my drill press, I've got my part in there. You can see I've made some lines on my vise there for the angle that the frame is, and I just used an angle finder just to find the angle on the frame, and then I transferred those lines over to my vise here. and I've got this part set up in there. So I'm going to be drilling a pilot hole with a 1/4 inch bit here, and then after my pilot hole is done, I'll be using a 1 1/4 inch hole saw. So I started this divot with the piece flat, and the reason for the divot is just to prevent my drill from sliding down the piece before it actually starts to drill in. And you probably noticed that my little divot there is offset from the center line that I've got marked out on my piece, and that's just because that's the offset that the heim joint is on the mount right now. So we're going to be offsetting this tab on the frame just to make sure that everything lines up once it's all together. Hopefully this will make more sense when you guys actually see it all come together. And this is that piece now that I've finished hole sawing it and cutting it off of the bigger chunk of metal. You can't really see the angle that it's at, but it is at a little bit of an angle, and it's just actually exactly how we wanted it to turn out. We just used this crappy angle finder to find the angle that the frame tube was in that spot, and then we just transferred that line onto the vise in our drill press, and that all worked out pretty good. And then we've just got to cut the part for the rear out of this section here, and then that'll be ready to weld onto the rear section of the frame there for the rear mount. So that's fitting nicely, and all we got to do now is clean up the frame a little bit, scrape some paint off here, and then it'll be ready to weld. Anyways, I've got all of my parts cut out and ready to be cleaned up. This is the mount for the back, and I just rounded that corner off. And I'm going to clean that up a little bit with my bench sander. I put a hole in there just to kind of make it a little more lightweight. It doesn't need to have all that material there. So that's the rear mount. This is the tab that's going to go on the rear. Also, this will be welded onto the frame. I just have a bolt in it right now just because I'm going to use that washer just kind of as a guide when I'm cleaning stuff up. And then these are the parts for the front. These are also just roughly cut out. I'm going to clean those up also with the belt sander. And this is the tab that we cut out for the front. So that'll be welded onto the frame. Anyways, I'm just going to step outside with my belt grinder, and I'm going to clean these things up a little bit, and then I'll show you guys what they're looking like after that. Okay, so I totally forgot to show a couple of these parts before I painted them, and that kind of annoys me because they were looking pretty good. But here are the two tabs that are going to be welded onto the frame. So this is the front mount. That's ready to go on the bike. And then this is the rear mount, all painted up. So I just rounded my corners off. Just got rid of any sharp corners that were there just from cutting the steel. That little bit of a bend in it for the clearance that we needed in the back there for the heim joint. And then this is the tab that's going to be going on the front. Cut that at a bit of an angle, and you guys can see that's to match the frame. And yeah, it's ready to weld. Just gotta wait for the paint to dry on those other two parts, and then we can weld tomorrow. And I'm excited to show you guys the end result, so stick around for that. Okay, so now that my mounts are painted and dried, I'm gonna put them on the bike. So they'll be going on permanently with some Loctite. Once those are on, we'll be able to line up the tabs that have to be welded onto the frame. So I've just got my engine jacked up just a tiny little bit, just to kind of help loosen up these bolts a little bit, because this front motor mount spreads out quite a bit. You do want your bolts to be a little loose just to help kind of get your mount on. So I've just got my scissor lift underneath here with a couple blocks of wood underneath the engine, and I'm not lifting it much. I'm just lifted it a little bit, and I'm gonna lift it a little bit more just till my bolts come loose enough that I can actually spin them. Okay, so that's the first one. Just jack it up a bit more till this bolt comes loose. There we go. Okay, so torque spec on these is 33 foot-pounds to 38. I'm just gonna go to 33. Try and do them evenly since this motor mount spreads out so much. Okay, so I'm ready to do my rear mount, and I've just got my engine jacked up with a couple blocks of wood, same as the front, and I just have one long block of wood spanning the length of the oil pan, just because you don't want to be jacking up right in the center of your oil pan. And I'm just going to jack this up a little bit till my bolts start to come loose on the rear motor mount here. So as you guys can see, the rear one is a little trickier to get to and also a lot more tricky to video. But my dad's just doing up the bolts on the other side and then I'll torque them up. We got that one all mounted up and yeah, that's how it's looking. You can hardly even see it in there. So torque spec on these is the same as the front, 33 to 38 foot-pounds. And I'm going to 33. Okay, so my heim joints can go on now, and these are not going to be going on permanently just yet. I'm just going to put them on so that we can line up the tabs that we'll be welding to the frame, and then we'll take these off for welding. And I'm not going to do this up tight just yet. I'm just going to do it just snug enough that we can still move it so that we can easily line everything up. And that should be good just like that for now. And on the front one, we needed a little bit of a spacer just for clearance. So I'll just bolt that on. Just make it just snug enough that it's not gonna flop around. And yeah, as you can see, that spacer's just giving us a little bit of clearance we need for the frame here. Okay, I'm all set up and ready to start tack welding these tabs on. You do want to get these as parallel to the frame as you can get them. It doesn't have to be super exact, but the closer you can get them, the better. So we just did that on the front just by measuring from either end of the engine mount here to just the same point on either end of the heim joint. And I've just got this steel wedge in here just kind of holding everything up. So we'll tack this on either side of the tab, and then once it's tacked, we can take the heim joint off. So same thing here on the rear, we have our heim joint with our tab attached, and we'll just put a couple tacks in that and then the heim joint will come off. So getting this one level, we couldn't actually measure from any point like on the frame or anything like that because the swing arms, it's not a machined surface or anything like that, so it's just casted. And what I did to make sure that my rear heim joint was nice and level, since I couldn't really measure it, is I just got myself a straight edge. You can go off the axle if you want, or you can use a straight edge. I found it a little easier to use a straight edge just on the back of the swing arm here, just right about at the very end before you get onto these tabs at the end here, and just looking straight on. That makes it a little easier just because it brings you down closer to the level of the heim joint, and you can just check your straightness off of that. And like I said, it doesn't need to be exact. It doesn't need to be within 1/1000th of an inch or anything like that. But the closer you can get it, the better. And you can definitely get it really close using a straight edge like that. All right, so now we can get these tacked on. Okay, so these are all welded up, and I put a coat of paint on them and let them dry overnight. I actually put a couple coats on them and let them dry. So don't judge me for my paint job, but it's a wrap bike, so it doesn't need to look pretty. And when the bike comes apart, then I can make those look a little nicer than they are. But for now, they're gonna work, so that's all that really matters. And this is the back one, which is exceptionally more messy looking for the paint because apparently I used too much paint. But thankfully that one is not very visible at all, so you won't really ever see it. Anyways, I'm gonna put the heim joints on and then we'll be done with those. Okay, so I've got my one for the front end. It's got this little spacer. I think I showed that before. I'm just gonna put a little bit of blue Loctite just inside of my mount. A little bit of Loctite on this one. I'm gonna do these up to 30 foot-pounds. Now we can move on to the back. Just a little drop of Loctite on there. Okay, so now that those are on, I can just set my heim joints. I gotta tighten the nuts up on them, and then the bike's pretty much ready to go back together. I mean, it does look pretty good from here. And one nice thing actually about these mounts is this is actually a lot lower profile than the Sputhe ones. Way less parts, and it actually tucks in nicely to the motorcycle. Whereas the Sputhe ones, you'd have them coming out quite a ways. If you don't mind welding to your frame, then this is actually just a really good alternative to the Sputhe ones. And it was about probably $600 cheaper, something like that. So, all right guys, so the bike is down and I'm just gonna fire it up on the bench real quick just to check clearances on the mounts. Everything should stay pretty stationary, but things are gonna move still a little bit. So I wanna just make sure that nothing is going to be hitting the frame or hitting anything else anywhere when the bike is running. So let's just get this thing fired up and take a close look at those mounts and make sure nothing's gonna touch anywhere. Well, I think that definitely passed the bench test. There's definitely enough clearance, both front and back, and everything does move slightly, of course, it's going to, but nothing moves enough to hit anything, so that is the key there. I'm pretty excited to take this thing out and test ride it and see how it handles around corners. I've heard people who use those Sputhe kits say that they make night and day difference for how their motorcycle handles, and apparently I won't even care about having an FXR anymore, but I think I'm still gonna care. But unfortunately for me, it's like the dead of winter here in Canada and the roads are not worthy to be ridden on. So I will be waiting till nicer weather before I take this thing out on the road and test ride it. I'm not worried about how it's gonna function. I think it's gonna be perfectly fine with the way that it functions. I think it's gonna do exactly what I want it to do. I just wanna get out there and take some corners fast. Anyway guys, thanks for watching. And if you guys decide you're gonna try this for yourselves, let me know in the comments. If you guys have a Sputhe kit, let me know in the comments too. Let me know what you think of that and how your bike handles before and after putting it on. And like always, my lovely people, I will catch you all on the flip side. Peace. I'm gonna be so flippin' sore by the time I'm done because my flippin' shoulder is flippin' flipped. What are you doing, Tiny? Hey, Tiny, had enough of your crap.
I am these days.
My Tiny's constantly retarded.
Tiny Martin, such a needy cat.
What's up, Tiny? What's up, Tiny? Hey, Teeny. Hey, Teeny. There's a demon under there. What's up, mister?
So, everything is done up on your bike?
For Pete's sake, this isn't really working out. Doody, doody, doody. A little bit with my belt. So the first measure, 2 side-by-swords. If you use the method that what I feel, the tabs that we're gonna be wendling. All right, I'm all set up and ready to test. So I gotta tighten the knife. Come on. Are you recording or are you just being a pain in the butt? Like Angel doesn't freaking know how to freaking